All right, this week on the podcast, I'm joined by Andrew Warde. Andrew is the founder of GracePoint Church in Biddeford. He also has a construction background as well as a background in real estate investing. We connected a while ago when he was doing some work for me on some properties that I own. Hadn't talked to him in a long time, but we recently reconnected through real estate investing, which has been great. The thing I did not realize about him was his involvement in GracePoint Church from the founding to what it's become since they opened up, I think, over 10 years ago. So the first half of the conversation is really focused on that. Shares what that whole process was like, the role that faith plays in his life, what they're doing at GracePoint. It was a great conversation. I think you'll really enjoy it if you check it out. This is the Randy Forcier Podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet and you do me a favor, please do that on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Andrew asked me what my goals are for the podcast, and I didn't have a good answer, but I do know that every week I ask for people to subscribe. So if you've enjoyed the podcast for a long time, if this is the first episode you've listened to, if you only listen to a handful, the one thing I could ask you to do is subscribe. It takes a second, and we really appreciate it. So thanks so much for checking out the podcast. Thanks for the support. Here's Andrew. Andrew Warde, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
We connected, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago, 12 years ago through mutual friends, fell out of touch for a while, reconnected recently, which is nice. When I started the podcast, you were kind of one of those guys that was always on the list for me of people I'd like to come on. And here we are, episode, I think 97, 98, and we're doing it. So I appreciate it.
It's amazing. You got almost 100 under your belt. Most people, I think, last like 3 or 4. So that's quite an achievement.
Yeah, 100 seemed like such a distant thing when it first got started. And I'd just been motivated to do it on a weekly basis, and here I am. So I have to set some new goals in the next few weeks, but we're definitely closing in on 100 just a few weeks away, which is very cool.
That's awesome. Thanks for having me.
So there's a whole bunch of reasons why I wanted to have you come on. Some personal reasons, some professional, some things that we're doing together. But I wanted to dig into your background and see how the conversation evolves. So why don't you tell me where you're from, how you got to Southern Maine, and then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, I'm originally from New Hampshire. So was born in New Hampshire, raised most of my life in New Hampshire. So New England by birth, not quite as good as Maine. I understand that for most people here, but kind of a close second. Mm-hmm. And from there, spent a little bit of time in Western Massachusetts, which I don't usually tell people in Maine, but in high school. And then South Carolina, I spent almost a decade between undergrad and grad school. So I was down there for undergrad and then was married, stayed down there for grad school. So we were down there almost a decade, and then, we really wanted to move back towards New England. And I was kind of almost surprised by moving to Maine. I kind of assumed I'd be back in New Hampshire. Admittedly, I had family. I had an uncle that lived in Maine. And so they were always bragging about Maine. And being in New Hampshire, you heard people talk about Maine and how like the ocean air and the ocean effect. And I kind of thought it was all a tourism thing, to be honest. I didn't think any of it was real. Mm-hmm. But we're really glad that we found ourselves in Maine. So we moved back to Maine in basically December 2010. So 2011. So it's good to be back in New England.
Yeah, so it's probably not that much before we actually were connected. So I didn't realize it was that late and that you spent all that time in South Carolina. So where in New Hampshire were you from? Was it
Concord?
Concord.
Yeah.
So,
Capital.
I mean, not too far away, but it's not like it's the seacoast where you're right across the border or anything like that. And
right.
Where'd you guys live in South Carolina?
We lived in the upstate, Greenville, South Carolina.
How'd you like it down there? Just totally different living than, comparatively, is it a lot different?
People, their food is amazing, probably kills you about 10 years early, and it's probably worth it. The weather, I did not like the weather at all. Like the weather, I didn't have much use for.
Too hot? Too humid?
It went from like blazing hot and humid to like the winters were about like 40 degrees and pouring rain.
Yeah.
Which I hated that worse than the cold here. It felt way colder than the north. So anyone like says, "Oh, I'm going to retire to the Carolinas," I just encourage you to go down and try it out first before you actually do it.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, I found 40 degrees and pouring rain way colder than 20 degrees and snowing.
Yeah,
personally. So, but we enjoyed our time down there. Greenville, it's still a very growing city, sort of one of those top. Reminds me a little bit of like a little bit bigger Portland, to be honest. Yeah. But a really thriving, growing area, a lot of business, a lot of culture. So it was a great place to be. We started our family down there, and we loved our time down there. So some great friends down there still to this day.
My sister-in-law, actually, I'm just getting back from Virginia. We drove to Virginia last week, and I just drove back yesterday. It was like about a 12-hour ride that turned into 14 or 15 hours each way. In particular, where she was, I was just telling some people that it felt like I was going to a time machine to a certain degree. Like the places, some of the little town centers that we drive through with the little post offices and very narrow roads and really wooded. And I don't know how different South Carolina is than that, but at least in my mind, I think Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina are very much that way.
Cost of living is definitely cheaper there. I mean, way cheaper.
I don't think I fully understood it until this past weekend. I mean, people say that, but they built a beautiful new home that is a fraction of what it would cost to build the same home up here. Like probably like a third of what it would cost, probably a quarter of what it would be in Massachusetts. So for that reason, I was like, oh my God, just to have like this nice, beautiful big home with plenty of land and plenty of grass and all that stuff. That is very appealing. So I can see why people do that. But Maine's pretty cool too. Like you said, for all the reasons that you said, weather's great, seasons are great, the beaches are great.
People are great.
Yeah, people are great. So you ended up in a great spot.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. It's been very, very nice. And my wife loves the ocean, didn't grow up with the ocean. I mean, I like it. My friends joke that I go like once a year to verify it's still there. And I think I'd like it better if the sand stayed put at the beach and didn't come into the car, in the house, and everywhere else. But yeah, we like being near the ocean. It's really nice.
All right. I just wanted to take 1 second from the podcast to let you know that besides hosting, I also do mortgages. I'm a residential loan officer with Norcom Mortgage in Saco, Maine. If you or anyone you know is thinking about buying a home in 2024 or refinancing as rates are coming down, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to help. My contact information is in the description below. Thanks, and back to the pod. So what brought you back to Southern Maine?
Yeah, particularly, it actually involved starting what is now GracePoint Church. So my training was all theological. So I have a master's in theology and divinity. Mm-hmm. And we moved to Maine, particularly the Biddeford area, for the purpose of starting a church. So some of the other pieces that we met through construction, I think I did some work on a couple of your multi-units.
You absolutely did, but you also did plans for an addition that we were going to potentially build at our old home before we ultimately decided to move. So that is how we first got connected. And up until we were emailing a little bit before the podcast where you said that the church is what brought you up there, I had no idea that was the case. I thought it was other reasons and that you were doing construction and then the church was a second thing. But GracePoint, I cannot believe has been around for as long as it has been then.
Yeah, September of 2011. So going on 12, 13 years, I guess. Yeah.
So that's quite a thing to start a church, I imagine. Like what goes into that people might not even realize?
Yeah, so I think it's my conviction that we're all people of faith. So if some people talk like, oh, I'm a person of faith or I'm not. I think we're all people of faith. It's essentially like you live and act off of things that you can't fully entirely prove. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think, well, if we're all people of faith, it's worthwhile investigating that faith and really understanding that and digging into that. And from there, I think you find purpose and passion and reason for existence and all the questions that everyone always tries to answer. The philosophers and literature throughout all the ages is working to answer. I think it's important that we spend the time to do that, and that anchors us and our souls. And so our passion is to do that in a way that is actually understandable and connection. I think sometimes maybe the religious community people, they've gone for years, but they just don't have any idea what's actually being talked about or what the connection is. And it's something you do because you're supposed to do it, but there's not. And that's it's a good ritual. I'm not condemning that, but how much better to understand and to engage with that with your mind, your heart, and your body, everything fully engaged as well. So that's the impetus behind GracePoint Church and coming up and starting that. So yeah, we didn't have huge funding or huge backers, or it's just start off as 10 or 11 individuals just meeting in a small room. We actually met at the North Dam Mill, and now which is the Pepperell Mills. Yeah, we joked that we had the tallest steeple in town with that big brick chimney. So it was super easy to find us and super hard to get to us because it was like a quarter-mile walk through the mills to get to our meeting space. But yeah, it's been like a steady growth. And Biddeford is one of the things I love about it. It's a very diverse community in general, like education levels, financial levels, cultural background is even getting a lot more diverse in the last decade since we've been here. And so I think that's been really fun to connect there. Some people have they have a religious background all their life, and some people it's literally the first time that they've engaged or had a thought towards that at all. So I think it's been a real joy to kind of experience that.
And I assume you're welcoming to all of those different types of people that you just mentioned.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's the joy to me, is actually talking about these concepts in language that's very engaged. I think sometimes we think of religion as sort of unreachable or untouchable, but really when Jesus came, everyone understood him. I mean, he was surrounded by farmers and fishermen and talked out of agricultural and the environment people grew up in and the things that were surrounding them. So I think that was the heartbeat behind it, is to actually have a very accessible and understandable. Now, that doesn't mean it's always easy for us, right? Because I think, well, particularly when we look at morality and what's right and wrong, I think there comes a piece where there's always a level of discomfort with any of us. I mean, I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier, and you talked about just the drive for parenting and becoming good parents. Well, to become a good parent, you have to acknowledge the times as a parent you're not doing a great job, or you're not getting the results you want to get, or things aren't going the direction, and then you have to pivot. Well, it's uncomfortable to adjust, but like to get where you're at, where you enjoy your family, you've had to do that, I'm sure, dozens, if not hundreds of times.
Yeah, thousands.
So I think there's a piece where, yes, absolutely, like, love engaging those conversations from anyone from a very basic starting level, no knowledge at all, to really have wrestled with this their entire life. And I think there's a real joy to having those conversations and an importance to having those conversations.
So I have a million questions, so please bear with my ignorance on some of them. But I grew up in a Catholic household, going to some of the more traditional churches in town, whether it was St. Joseph, St. Mary, St. Andreas, churches I'm sure you're familiar with to some degree. How is GracePoint different in terms of denomination, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So it's a non-denominational Christian church. So we're not affiliated with any denomination. And we've got friends in a lot of different denominations, but we're not like directly connected or affiliated with them. I think in some ways people would find it maybe less traditional. So we have a band with drums and electric guitar and things like that. But yet very much anchored on the Word of God. So we're speaking from the Word of God on a regular basis with the desire to understand and really engage with it. So I'd say maybe less formal, and hopefully, but yet very understandable and very committed to developing personal understanding and heart connection and faith. So it's faith, but with understanding, connected with that understanding piece.
So to me, this is a new concept. Although it's probably not very new at all. It's probably something that exists all around me and I'm unaware of it. But is this something that you practice down in South Carolina and the seed was planted in you, maybe even earlier than that, to start a church in a community, and this is the community that you chose?
Yeah, so we were involved in a church that was started down in South Carolina. South Carolina is a little bit different where it's at maybe culturally. So in some ways, I would describe maybe New England as, what do they say? Like, spiritual, but not religious. So it's sort of almost like post-religious. There's good and bad to that. That's just, I think, maybe a reflection of where it's at. So the story you told, hey, growing up, maybe going fairly regularly or engagement, that's generationally a pretty broad swath of New England fits into that. And some of that disengagement, I think, is just because people weren't sure why they were doing it in the first place. And so instead of like reaching into meaning, life gets busy. We all get busy, careers, kids, family. It's easy just to disengage with that. And then sometimes it takes time just to go back and be like, oh yeah, why am I doing this? What do I believe? Why does this matter? Where is that purpose kind of there? So I think those two areas, like the South, in some ways, I think like maybe New England is leading. Maybe the South is kind of moving the direction New England is, but it's maybe probably a good 20 years behind, I would guess. Obviously the South's a big area, so is the New England. So those are overgeneralizations, but
yeah, I do follow what you're saying. That whole post-religion concept, like you said, more spiritual than religious. It does seem like maybe they're more religious than spiritual, or I wouldn't say not spiritual, but like religion's probably a little bit more of a focus down in the southern part of the country. So I could see them tailing a little bit behind New England in that sense. Are churches like GracePoint a common thing in South Carolina or in the South? Or?
I think it's somewhat common and maybe becoming more common as well. So the South, I think you would have a lot more just general people who are committed to weekly or regular religious practices, where maybe in New England, that's not as much. I mean, some of those numbers are 5 to 10% in New England. So it's a lot lower than the South. But yeah, those churches are common. Even in the area here, there's a number of churches that I would say that I could point to that would be similar in, you still have different strengths. We all have different strengths and nuances, but there's several that I would say would fit into that similar building.
Now, do you do, I assume, a weekly mass, but are there like multiple weekly masses? Are there daily masses there? How does that part work?
Yeah, great question. So we have a large gathering on Sunday mornings is where we're typically doing that. And we have some other pieces. But then what we like to do is actually break down into smaller groups throughout the week. So there'll be, family studies and, men's groups and women's groups. So there's a number of pieces, because those rotate in and out. Sometimes they're topic based. Sometimes those are curriculum based. They're working through a book. But the goal is to kind of build that community and that personal engagement as well. So we have one general large group gathering, and then on a normal week we'll have those smaller group gatherings that meet throughout the week. So and sometimes those will be in homes, in the church, like those will be in different places, not always at the facility.
So I actually didn't even bring this part up, and I don't know the answer to this, but you founded the church. Are you also the pastor to the church? Is that even a role that is pastor is the right term to use?
Yes. Yeah. Andrew also works fine, but yeah. So yeah, I am the pastor of the church.
Yeah. So are you always leading Sunday Mass? Are there other people that do this, or is there multiple people that would have a role in the church, or is it mostly on your shoulders?
Yeah. So I'm not always leading it, and that is by design. Certainly I have a certain personality and style, and I think that connects to hopefully a good number of people. But I also acknowledge that everybody has different preferences and styles. And so like we deliberately have on a regular basis at least two others that will sort of share leading that Sunday service teaching section. And so we do work to engage a number of different people in the services. So we had a Good Friday service, and there were probably 10 or 12 different individuals engaged in different portions of that service. And obviously those were not all me. I had a very small role in that service. Yeah. So it's working to kind of engage more of that community as well there.
You are located on South Street in Biddeford. Anyone that's not from Biddeford would not be familiar with the space, but anyone in the Biddeford Saco area that's listening to the podcast would very much be familiar with this space. It's a space that I spent time going to as a kid, even into my 20s, maybe into my early 30s. But to me, it seems like a perfect location for GracePoint Church. The perfect location in the city, easy to get to, but a little bit out of the way, great parking, big space. I've been inside it since it's been GracePoint. You have the spot for the large gatherings. You have plenty of spots for small gatherings. Yeah. Did you hit a home run when you got that place? Did the place lead you guys coming up, or did you know you were coming up and then you found the place? How'd that part work?
That was actually our third location, to be honest.
Oh, yeah. So you already said North Danville.
Yes. Yeah. And then we were at the MacArthur Hall. I think it went by another name for a period of time, down by the old court, the old courthouse, the new old courthouse. Yeah. And then we were kind of outgrowing that space. And that space was great, but it was particularly challenging for winter parking and for those who had physical limitations, mobility limitations. And so we started looking. We actually were looking at another spot that kind of closed down based on criteria that we were looking at. And then at a similar point, this had been on the market a while, and we just started exploring and worked with the members of the Rochambeau Club, and they were great to work with. And I think we felt like it was a good handoff. And we do continue to host. We host community events, weddings. Biddeford High School uses the parking lot on a regular basis for their parades to start.
Oh yeah, they all gather there before they drive in.
Yeah, we hosted a Biddeford school system during COVID for that 1 year as the remote learning center.
Yeah.
So that's part of that original sort of function that the Rochambeau Club had, was like a community gathering place, and we continue to do that, and we're thrilled. We feel like it's a trust from the community, this facility. So we love hosting those types of events there and trying to do it at a very reasonable cost, just to basically cover our costs. We're not trying to make money on it. Cover the cost and keep that facility open to the community. So
it provides a service to the community too, which is
absolutely.
Which is great. You did a lot of work to that place when you got it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is where some of your construction background obviously helped through that process. Why don't you tell me about the construction part of your life? Is obviously religion's been a big part of your life, but was there a construction piece that goes way back as well, parallel to everything that you just brought back up here? Or did you get more into it when you were here?
Yeah, great question. So I didn't grow up in the house I grew up in. We didn't do tons of construction, painting we'd do and stuff like that, but like small projects, but not a lot. And I just was curious about it. So there's a man in the church that now is my father-in-law. And I was like, hey, I don't know anything. I was in high school. I was like, can I just work for free and you teach me some stuff and put up with me? And he was a very good teacher, and his father was also a really good teacher. And then throughout high school, I ended up working for an Italian builder down in Massachusetts. And he was a great guy to work for. Once again, I was the grunt on the site. So I did some stuff there. I had a mentor. We did some volunteer projects, maybe similar to what Habitat for Humanity would be up here, but through a church down in South Carolina. So I learned through that. First 2 years of grad school, I worked for a guy that did like real high end tile work. We did a Frank Lloyd Wright home and stuff like that. I mean, some really nice stuff there. And so I moved to Maine, and I thought like, oh, I'll just get a job, and while we're working with the church, and I kind of just planned on doing that. What I had not thought about was a degree, a master's in divinity isn't like super marketable. And so
very specific. That's a very specific one.
Yeah, it's a very specific. It's like I think it's good for flipping burgers, on the job market. And that's not knocking flipping burgers, but it's just people don't know what to do with that, right? What's that equip you for? So I had been looking for a job, and on the side, people kind of found out I did construction, and they were like, "Hey, like, could you do this?" And so eventually, I got to the point where I was looking for a job, almost full time, and working full time in construction. And then at some time, I'm like, I'm just an idiot. I already have a job that gives me the flexibility. So I was doing that with a business partner, and we grew into a niche. And we did some light commercial, a lot of residential. We ended up doing a lot of like 203K loans or like rehab plus loans. We didn't mind the paperwork, where a lot of people seem to hate that.
You're speaking my language now. People that aren't familiar with that type of loan, it's basically a type of loan where you can roll in the cost for renovations.
Correct.
And you're right when you say that a lot of builders don't like. If you have an old school builder that's been building homes for decades, everything's kind of pad and paper, isn't into signing things electronically or providing documentation. It can be challenging, but it sounds like a good niche, or I'm sure it was, at least for a period of time. But if you are familiar with that process and you're okay with it on the builder side of things, you can connect with some people that are looking for that type of builder, and you really crush it.
Yeah, it was a great niche. We had some great customers. Very, very, like, just can't say enough good things about like that process. Obviously, I'm not primarily in construction right now, but we worked with some great lenders, did some great products. I mean, really proud of the projects that we were able to accomplish in the community. So.
Yeah. Like you said, you're not actively in it right now. So how has your business transitioned from back then? Because if I remember correctly, weren't you trying to do like really energy efficient homes at one point? Or am I making this up?
Yeah. No, we did. So we did we actually got into some Maine building magazines through one of the homes and did a lot of innovative products. We did a house that the person had a lot of allergies. So sourcing was very, very important. So we did a lot with that, and just, we really loved and enjoyed that challenge. And I think it turned out great. I think it wasn't so much leaving construction, and wasn't so much a knock on construction as it was, we were also growing in real estate at the time, and maintaining both of those wasn't, like, sort of one had to give, and we didn't really want to put the time into really developing a crew chief to keep the construction going, and we really want to be in real estate. So when we moved to Maine, when we were talking about the South, like, the sticker shock was crazy on real estate, and particularly when it came to the utilities and taxes. I mean, so I had a house in South Carolina. Our tax bill was $400 a year, and
yes, that is 15 years ago, but still, like, $400 a year is probably $800 a year now, and so
jumping to Maine is about $3,000. So it was like, it's a big sticker shock. And the utility, our highest utility bill total of all of them was like $150 in a month. Like, that was everything. So it was quite a jump. So we got into like the multi-units, and we're like, well, we can live in a multi-unit, and it seems to make sense. This was like pre-Bigger Pockets, so we didn't know about like Burr and house hacking
and all that stuff.
So we were just like, we're like looking at the numbers, and we're like, well, it seems like it should work, and and so we got into that. We tried buying one of them, and then we ended up with two of them. So we got a contract on one, and they said, "Oh, great, you got the contract." They, the sellers agreed to your price, and then they're like, "Oh, by the way, did you know it's a short sale?" And we're like, "What's a short sale?" And they're like, "We don't know."
That was very big back then. Like, now it's very rare to be dealing with a seller that's going through a short sale, but back then, oh my God, it seemed like half the transactions were a short sale.
Yeah, no one knew what they were. No one knew how to like process them quickly. They just knew it took a long time. So we went and got another building under contract. And then we got approved with that one. They said, "Oh, that one's a short sale too." And you're like, "Oh my goodness!" Like, this is. So we say, "There's no way they're both going to close." And then we got approval to close within 2 weeks of each other on the two multi-units, and we're like, "Oh no!" So we went from like 0 to a 4-unit and a 3-unit like in 2 weeks. So So it's kind of it was a fun jump. So
so how has real estate transitioned for you now? Like, how is it different? Like, I know you're still involved in real estate. That's obviously how we reconnected, but how has that whole thing changed for you?
Yeah, so we're doing a lot of work, I'd say, at this point in time with distressed assets of multiple types. So sometimes it's financially distressed, you think of foreclosure, short sales, behind on payments. Sometimes it's like we're dealing with probate situations where owners are deceased, and those you have to work with those properties. Distressed landlords with some tenant situations. We just started getting into some lead paint renovations. So the lead paint requirements, that's a whole different conversation. But like they're pretty stringent and they're hard to work with. And so we've been buying up properties that have lead paint remediation orders against them, working with a contractor that we partnered with to get them cleaned up, and then either keeping them or getting them back on the market for good tenants and good owners.
The idea on the lead paint thing, I do want to get back to some of the other things you said, but the idea on the lead paint thing is you are helping the current owner because it's too much of a task for them to deal with the lead paint remediation themselves. You come in, you have a turnkey solution, you can do it at a cheaper cost, quicker, more efficient, and then turn around, like you said, rent it, sell it, whatever. But that's the value proposition to the people that own properties in those situations.
Yeah, and sometimes, honestly, I mean, lead paint remediation is just very expensive. I mean, the one I just did was a 4-unit, and the bill was about $100,000. And so often when people get that kind of a number, and there's not really a cheaper way to do it, the number of contractors in Maine that are licensed and that can handle it are very few. So they're just like, I'm out. I don't want to be a landlord anymore. I don't want to deal with this. So what we'll often do is actually just buy the property, do the remediation. Sometimes you get a clear test, and then it takes a month for the state to recognize it before you can start putting tenants back in. So it's a complicated process. So what we'll do is we'll often, if they're just done, we'll come in, we'll buy them, we'll take care of all the lead remediation. It's something you don't have to worry about disclosing, handling it. I mean, it should be disclosed if you're going to sell it to somebody, obviously. But we come in, we handle all that. And if we don't keep it, we'll put a clean product back on the market that's been certified for 20 years.
So everything you just said that you're marketing to, so people in probate, distressed landlords, these lead paint remediation, all these scenarios you described, like I hear that and I'm like, wow, that's awesome, right? Like to be able to get that type of business. But it's like, how do you even identify those people? How do you connect with those people? Is it through a network that you've created? Is it, the signs that you see at Biddeford Crossing that say, sell your house for cash tomorrow or something? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, so great question. A variety of sources. So sometimes it's just we see addresses, we'll drive around, see a property, it's distressed. I mean, Maine has a huge housing crisis, which everybody knows. And what's crazy is how many houses are sitting vacant and unused in the midst of a housing crisis. So for us, we feel like, man, if we can help resolve some of these situations, get them back on the market, like get great people in them. I mean, it does everybody a favor. I mean, we can't build fast enough right now to kind of meet the demand, and the costs are so high to building. So
they really are.
They're reasonably priced housing in there. That's not knocking the builders. I mean, they need to charge what they need to charge, but it's just
they have to. I mean, it's probably $400 a square foot at this point. I don't know if that's exaggerating a little bit. Like that's kind of the number I had in my mind, and it wasn't like that, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago.
No, and your land costs are high. So to have vacant properties that are sitting there is just it almost feels not truly criminal, but quasi criminal. So we have some resources that contact us, and because we can kind of handle all those types of distress, we become a great resource for people. They'll reach out and say, hey, there's this house, or a lot of times we work with investors. They're like, man, I've got this house, I'd like to buy it, or I know this piece of property. I don't have the time to chase down. I don't have time to make contact. So our team will do the legwork for them and then make contact with them. And then once we get that, we'll get the property back to them. So, that's, and it'll all be cleaned up, titles free and clear. We kind of work through all the liens. So we've got a great team that we work with to accomplish all that. So we work with the probate attorneys. We work with, realtors that are particularly trained with short sales. We work with contractors, lenders. So we've got the whole package that we can kind of really take an asset that's kind of toxic and then just bring it back to the market. So
one of the things we didn't mention is the name of your company is the Blue Sky Properties.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, Blue Sky Properties.
Why'd you name it that? Does that have any type of meaning, or you're just like, I like the name of that, like the vibe of that?
So it's not as purposeful as maybe it's become meaningful to us, but the origin behind it actually is we went to go to the bank to deposit from those multi-units we bought our first checks, and they're like, you need a company name, and we're like, oh. And we didn't have.
You just looked up and you were like, okay.
Yeah. So my friend had gone to Montana recently, and he's like, oh, Big Sky. I guess it's what they call Montana. I've been there.
There's a spot and there's a place called Big Sky.
I was like, that's dumb. We're in Maine. It's not it's not Montana. And so we're like, well, how about Blue Sky? Because the color's great, and I love the optimism of just like blue skies, and
definitely.
Everyone loves that, particularly at this time of year. So that's kind of where the origin of Blue Sky came from. It's more of a comical story than a really, we sat down for 3 weeks and meditated over this.
I figured that was the case. But, So how many people work for you at Blue Sky at this point?
So on our direct team, I'd say there's like 5 of us. And then there's a number of other partners that we work with. So we have some realtors that we work with regularly. There's attorneys we work with regularly. So we're regularly in communication with probably 10 to 12. So
Is wholesaling a part of your business? And for those that don't know, wholesaling is like identifying a property at a certain price and then connecting an investor or an interested buyer with that property, and then you make a little bit of money for making that connection. Is that something that you're doing at this point in your business?
Yeah, so it really is property dependent. So we do some wholesaling. We do some like double closing where we'll buy but hold for a very short period of time. Sometimes the situation will require that. We do some rehabs. We do a couple of those typically a year. We'll rehab and then sell it directly. We've got one of those that we're queuing up here for the next month. And then we have some that like a little bit of buy and hold as well. So it's kind of property dependent. Anything we're trying to do, we're trying to keep our focus really on solving those toxic asset problems. And so as a result of that, like we don't try to do any huge flips. I mean, we have the capability and the skill. We've done some crazy builds and remodels, but it just takes a certain amount of energy and focus. And there's a number of guys that's what they do all day, every day. And it's just a lot better for that at this point in time than ours are. So for those, we'll just say, hey, we'll flip you the property, wholesale it or double close, and then we'll work with them and we're on to the next one. So
Now, where did you learn to do all these things? I mean, you mentioned Bigger Pockets. That's an outlet for people, but did you have a mentor? Did you stumble and fail and learn through that? Or like, how'd you learn?
Yeah, great question. So I had some interest in it, and I think I went to a Robert Kiyosaki thing. I don't know if he's still
is that the Rich Dad Poor Dad?
Poor Dad, yep.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, those are interesting. And I didn't take any action at all. Like I was like, it was kind of annoying. And then I actually, when we had the construction company, I was like, well, I'd like to get into building more of our real estate portfolio, but the payoff for some of the construction jobs weren't high enough that we were really gaining the speed that we wanted to. So I was like, well, we have construction skills. Why don't we flip properties? Is how we were thinking on that. And then I went to the market to try finding properties, and I couldn't find anything. It was, the pricing didn't make sense. The numbers didn't make sense. So then we're like, well, we're gonna have to go find some ourselves. And so I talked to a guy, and he's like, here's what I do. And so I was like, oh, we could do that. And so we kind of just worked there. And I mean, like I said, it's about the people you have around you. The very first contract I got on a property, I was so excited. I brought it into the title company, and he was like, this is the worst contract I've ever seen in my life. He said, do not ever bring me this again. But the property closed. See, that's the important thing. Because we had an agreement between the buyer and the seller. The property closed. I got a better contract from the title company, and then we just kind of learned and moved forward,
There's so much to say about that, though. Like the fact that you just did it, and even if it was wrong or wasn't perfect, and like you learned through that process. I mean, I feel like there's a difference between people that do that and then people that don't do anything at all because they're just paralyzed by the idea of it. And it's like, the thing I've learned in doing the podcast for almost 100 episodes, like we were saying, is like the advice that I hear from people all the time is like, just do it. You know what I mean? And you doing that, even with the worst contract probably ever written in the state of Maine, like you still did it, and here we are all these years later.
Yeah. And I think that's a piece where particularly it seems like real estate's kind of viewed as a sexy industry a little bit, and particularly like flipping. People talk to me, they're like, oh, I want to get into it. And I'm like, why? I'm always curious, why do you want to get into it? And usually if it's about the money, I'm like, don't bother. Like it's like, because to us, you really have to understand what the value you're providing to the community is. And because it's hard, it takes a lot of work, a lot of persistence. And then it's not just taking action, but it's taking, I'd say, the critical action. So a lot of people say, oh, I want to get into real estate. Well, what do? They go print out some business cards and they go like try to build a buyer's list. And I'm like, get a deal. Like, go get a deal. Like that's where the energy. So you can spend a lot of time doing things that are like on the fringe of activity and that are related, but they don't really move you forward. And that's where I say, like, hey, like it's not just take action, but take critical action quickly.
No, that's great advice. Yeah, I see it in my business. I see it in real estate. Yeah, there's a difference between creating a Facebook page and promoting your business and then like doing business. So I think that's a good reminder to get out there. What would you say your key to success has been, whether it's GracePoint, real estate, construction, anything? Do you have like a key to success or like a mantra that you live by?
I think it's to truly try to create value. Like whatever space you're in, understand the value you're creating and then try to create value for other people so that you're there not to take or to receive, but you're there to give. And as you're there focusing on giving, you want everybody to win. You want everyone to benefit. Now, it's hard to pull that off every single time, but I think people read when you're truly trying to care about them and have success all around versus when you're just in it for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's where I'd say, like, for us, and really, we won't bring on someone to our team that we don't feel like shares that value, because to us, I think it's a huge differentiation point.
Yeah.
So.
Always great to hear, man. It's actually something in my mortgage business that we are trying to continue to focus on, right? Like there's a million loan officers, there's a million people that do what I do, and you could work with any one of them. It's like, how do we provide value to our referral partners, to the people we do business with, to our community, set us apart? And I think when you have that giver's gain mentality, that's one way to really set yourself apart.
Probably a snappier way of putting it than I did. Giver's gain.
Giver's gain is one of the mantras of BNI. I don't know if you've ever heard of BNI.
Yes.
BNI is like for networking stuff, something that I've been very involved in my business. And that's like the number one thing, giver's gain. So it's like, that's been hammered in my head for the past whatever amount of years that I've been doing that. And to like hear you say it, but a different way, it reinforces the idea for me that it doesn't just apply to BNI, it applies to business, it applies to life. You focus on giver's gain, you'll ultimately get what you want as well, eventually.
Yes. Absolutely.
You know? So listen, man, I think those are the main things I want to talk about. Actually, no, there was one other thing. This is one of the things we were talking about before, but tell me about the Iron Butt Association before we go, because I get a little challenge with them.
Yeah. So I took up riding motorcycles during COVID, and my wife was totally fine with it because she didn't think I'd stick with it. And then it stuck. Stuck. It's stuck hardcore. So I think I'm within the first 2 years, I went through 9 different bikes to kind of find the one that I really liked and enjoyed. And then
so what'd you settle on then? What'd you settle on? Like, I don't know anything about bikes, but what'd you get?
I got the R1250 GS. It's like in the adventure style bike. So it does not sound as good as a Harley. I don't care what the BMW salesman says. Harleys sound better, but I love the way it rides. Yeah. And so the challenge is basically riding 1,000 miles. They have several different challenges, but their sort of basic one is riding 1,000 miles on a motorcycle in a day in 24 hours. And I don't know why, but I had this like weird hankering to like try that, and I'd never done that. I'd done some like 500s, and I'd done some probably 700 within 24 hours. So I had to make a trip to South Carolina, Tennessee and South Carolina for some business stuff. One meeting that I really wasn't looking forward to is one of those unpleasant meetings in life. So then I was like, how do I create a win out of this? And then I was like, well, what if I rode my bike down there? So I just did that early March. So it's about 1,050 miles from here to Greenville, South Carolina. So I left on a Friday morning about 2:30 from my house. You have to like stop and get fuel to start your clock is kind of how they do it. So I stopped in Biddeford. Funny enough, my bike wouldn't restart when I was at the gas station at 2:30 in the morning, and my bike would not restart. So this is going to be a great day, But yeah, so I brought a jump pack with me, jumped it, and then I rode from there to South Carolina. So I got in about 8:30 at night. So about 1,050 miles, and
that is insane. It's so funny given what I was just telling you about my trip down to Virginia. So it's like, I know what it's like to drive 800 miles in a day, add an extra 200. Like that's a lot of miles in one day.
It's quite a few.
And how much did the forecast play a role in this? Did you look at a forecast? Because I know half of my drive yesterday was in downpouring rain, and I had no clue that was what I was getting into. But like on a bike, you'd probably want to try to avoid that, I imagine.
Yeah, so my thought going into it was that my biggest concern was going to be the cold. Like the rain looked okay on the way down, but the temperature looked cool. So I'd done some prep work in Maine already to see how cold I could handle. And I thought like if I left early, it would be cold, but I could get out of the cold quickly. It didn't happen as quickly as I thought. I think about the first 6 hours averaged about like 36 degrees. Yeah. So on a bike with wind chill, I don't know where you're at, but like it's cool. But I had the right gear, and that worked well. And then I got rain, and then I had about 2 hours of really nice riding in like southern Pennsylvania, like northern Virginia. There's some beautiful areas. I took 81. I don't know what you took down there, but like
by the time we got into Virginia, I think we were still on 95.
95, okay, yeah. So I was a little bit more west, and it's a beautiful like area there. And then I hit like rain and traffic for the rest of it. So the forecast didn't turn out to be as nice as I had anticipated. But at some point, you're like, well, I'm committed. So
yeah, I mean, absolutely.
It wasn't as horrible as I thought. I mean, I'd done a good bit of prep work prior, but it wasn't as horrible as I thought it would be.
I wouldn't have thought, like when you said the 1,000 mile challenge, like in my mind, like, okay, you're doing like a big loop in southern Maine, a bunch of times. Like I did not really think of it as like, okay, I'm going 1,000 miles south,
Yeah,
and but then you
yeah.
had to do 1,000 miles back.
And that's the thing that kind of hit me. So I had most of my friends and family were like, "You're kind of insane. Like that's a little crazy." And I was like, "I don't know. I don't think so. It's like just, I mean, I've got to go down there anyway, so might as well
Yeah,
ride the motorcycle." And about like 4 hours in, I was like, to your point, I'm like, I got to ride back. Like,
yeah,
so
yeah,
every mile I go, I got to ride back this direction. And I was like, I kind of see what they were saying,
yeah,
but about 20, like, so I did about 2,600 miles in that week,
yeah,
but it was a cool way to, I mean, I'm not saying biking is the only way to do it. There's a lot of ways. It was just a very different way. I'd ridden that route a lot coming back and forth from college and living down there, but it was just a different way to experience it. And there's just some really cool, just like sort of semi-magical moments there that I don't know that you would have seen on a car in the same way.
yeah. I'm
So
sure.
yeah, it was a neat adventure. I don't know if I would like do it like again, but probably under the right conditions, I probably
Yeah.
would. So
Well, at least you did it. 1,000 miles in one day is no joke. I know how tired I was. I mean, I just got home last night, and it's just like that last few hours, just like some nodding off, and me and my wife were going back and forth. And at least we had that. But like, man, to go the 1,000 one day at the end must have. I don't know. Is it different in a bike? Are you like just because you're more engaged with the wind and the fresh air? Like maybe the tiredness doesn't kind of set in quite the same. But
I
I
mean,
know in the
I think it probably can. I mean, maybe I could think it's even harder on a bike than in a
Mhm.
car. Like I've driven that trip a lot, and I'd say it's harder because like you're sitting sort of in one position. Like I say one position, I mean you're trying to start stretching and moving your foot position around and like
Yeah.
keeping like you make sure your body's loose and not tense because it's really easy to just get tensed up, particularly with the
Mhm.
cold. You tend to just contract your body. I mean, it's the
Mhm.
same as a lot of sports skiing or like loose is better. Well, it's very
Mhm.
much the same with motorcycle riding. I mean, you need to stay loose, but everything in you when you get tired or cold wants to tighten up. So
Yeah.
you're kind of fighting your body and the fatigue on that a little bit. So it's yeah, it's more challenging than riding a car for
Hey,
sure, I think.
love it.
And I mean, good or bad, the consequences of messing up are worse. So
Yes.
so I think there's a piece of that that's in the back of your brain as well
Yeah.
going through that.
Yeah.
So
Well, hey man, I'm glad you made it and got it done. Congrats on the 1,000 miles.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun. So
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the podcast, man. It's great to catch up. Learned a lot about you today. I look forward to getting this podcast out and spreading the word on GracePoint and some of the things you got going on.
yeah,
And I
I want to say
yeah,
thank you for doing these podcasts. Like, I think it's such a benefit to the community to have a
Mhm.
local voice, and I think I was enjoying. I caught them here and there, and when you did the mayor one, the two mayoral candidates,
Yeah.
I just thought like, wow, this is like the best thing for this local community because I so often it seems like other sources are very soundbitey and like
Mhm.
you get clips and pieces. And so I just want to thank you for what you're doing for the community through this podcast. I think it's an amazing resource for the community to take advantage of. So I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you mentioning that, man. I never thought of myself as like someone that would have a role in the community, kind of like this to the degree this is even a role in the community. But I do know that the podcast has had an impact on certain things, the mayoral race being one of those things. Like I know plenty of people that listen to that and formed an opinion based off it. And I know a lot of people have gotten business through my podcast or have made friendships through the podcast. And I know that I've had all of those things through it. So it's been interesting to see what it's evolved into in this period of time. And I appreciate you taking note of it, man, because it's been a lot of fun.
Here's to 100. So what's next for you on this? Have you thought, or can you share? Is it top secret?
No, I mean, in terms of like the long-term plan for the podcast,
Yeah.
like honestly, I don't know. Like I never had like listenership goals. I mean, on every podcast, I'm always asking for people to subscribe because I feel like that's like the natural thing to do. Like I do like to see progress and I want to see growth, but like I don't have specific goals and I'm not like trying to make money off of this. I don't make money off of this
Yep.
outside of if I'm able to promote my business and someone hears it and wants to do a loan, I'm happy to do it. But like I don't get like money from subscribers or from advertisers or anything like that. So I think I have to really do some soul searching on what my next plan is. 100 has been the goal and I'm here now. So what's next? Is it 200? Do I want 10,000 people subscribed? Do I want to make some money from it? I don't know. But I said that I would do it regardless if anyone listened to it when I first started. Like that was my goal. Like
Yeah.
do this, I'm gonna have some good conversations. And I would say it's exceeded what my hope was with what I've gotten out of it so far. But I definitely have to make some more plans just because I think it makes sense to plan things in general. So
That's amazing. That's
yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you very much for doing it.
We'll see. Yeah. I appreciate you coming on, man. So thanks again. We'll do it again sometime.
That was good. Thanks, Randy.